It started with a bark, not the kind of bark that echoed in a park or a backyard, not the playful bark of a dog chasing after a tennis ball. This was different. This was the kind of bark that could crack through the air like a gunshot. Sharp, urgent, and chilling. Blaze stood frozen at the edge of the field, eyes locked on a figure that, at first glance, seemed ordinary. The other students were laughing, tossing frisbees, chasing each other across the grass like it was just another school trip in the woods. Teachers chatted in clusters, sipping coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. But Blaze saw it. Blaze felt it. Something wasn't right. The man, tall, thin, wearing a dark baseball cap that cast a shadow over his eyes, hovered near the tree-line. His name was Mr. Cartwright, one of the chaperones, someone the students were supposed to trust. But to Blaze, the air around him smelled off. There was an edge in the man's body language, a tension in the way his fingers clenched and unclenched at his sides. And then Blaze saw her. Samantha, 10 years old, quiet, shy, the kind of kid who always kept to herself. She stood a few yards away from the group, head down, tracing circles in the dirt with her sneaker. That was when Mr. Cartwright moved quick, almost too quick. He glanced over his shoulder, and in that split second, Blaze's instincts roared to life. The bark erupted from Blaze's chest, deep and ferocious, cutting through the laughter and the distant hum of the wind. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Blaze lunged forward, leash tight in the handler's grip. His handler, Officer Rick Morales, jerked awake from the casual chat he was having, barely able to hold Blaze back as the dog snarled, eyes blazing with something fierce and unstoppable. "Blaze, easy, boy. What's wrong?" Rick called out, but the dog didn't back down. The field fell silent. It was as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. And then Mr. Cartwright stepped back, just a little. His eyes darted toward the woods behind him. Blaze's snarl deepened. Samantha flinched. Rick saw it, the slight tremble in her small hands. The way her eyes darted between Blaze and Cartwright, wide with fear. "Hey, Cartwright, what's going on over there?" Rick's voice cut through the tension, firm but steady. Cartwright's lips twitched, a forced smile. "Nothing, officer. Just check in on the kids, making sure everyone's safe." But Blaze didn't believe him. Blaze's nose twitched, and he pulled harder toward Samantha, as if the scent of something wrong clung to her like smoke. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Hero for Animals, where we share real stories of the dogs who save lives, the heroes on four paws who teach us to see the world in a whole new light. Rick hesitated. His hand hovered over Blaze's collar, unsure. Samantha's eyes silently screamed a message Rick hadn't yet put together. And then, like a thunderclap, the realization hit him. This wasn't just a scared dog. This was a warning. Blaze lunged again, his bark rising in urgency. And this time, Samantha yelped and stumbled backward right as Cartwright's hand shot out to grab her wrist. "Hey!" Rick shouted, but Cartwright was already moving fast. Too fast for a man his age, half dragging Samantha toward the trees. The sound of Blaze's bark was like a war cry now. Rick felt the leash tear from his hands, the force too strong to hold. Blaze bolted, his paws tearing into the earth, ears pinned back, a blur of tan and black streaking toward the man and the girl. Samantha's scream pierced the air, and time seemed to fracture. Rick ran. The students screamed. Teachers froze, eyes wide in horror. Blaze was a missile, a bullet of fur and fury, cutting through the clearing like a storm unleashed. His teeth bared, his muscles rippling. He leapt, and then Cartwright twisted, holding Samantha like a shield. Blaze skidded to a halt, barking so furiously that spittle flew from his mouth. Tail stiff, every sense locked on the man in front of him. Rick's breath came in ragged gasps as he caught up, heart pounding in his ears. "Let her go." Rick barked, one hand on his radio, the other stretched forward. But Cartwright's eyes, there was something wrong in those eyes. Cold, calculating, like a man who had nothing left to lose. And still, Blaze didn't back down. His body was a coiled spring, ready to strike. For a heartbeat, the whole world held its breath. Rick's heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. The wind cut to the trees, cold and sharp, but he barely felt it. His focus was on Blaze, standing tall, rigid, and unyielding in front of Cartwright. The dog's chest rose and fell with every rapid breath. His gaze locked onto the man like a laser. Blaze didn't flinch. He didn't waver. His whole body seemed to vibrate with an unspoken message. This isn't over. Let her go. Rick's voice cut through the tense air, sharp as a blade. Samantha whimpered, her small hands trembling as Cartwright's grip tightened around her wrist. The man's knuckles turned white, his breathing uneven, eyes darting between Rick and Blaze. His forced smile was long gone, replaced by a flicker of something else, something darker. Rick's gut twisted. This wasn't the face of a man trying to help a lost child. This was the face of a predator who'd been caught mid-hunt. Hey, easy now. Cartwright finally spoke, his voice low and measured, like a man trying too hard to sound calm. She was just feeling a little faint. I was helping her to the shade. Blaze's growl rose low and steady, deep in his throat. His tail stiffened like a rod, and Rick had seen enough 9 calls to know. Blaze wasn't bluffing. Rick raised one palm forward, keeping his voice steady. Cartwright, step away from the girl now. But Cartwright didn't move. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of calculation flashing across his face. For a split second, Rick could almost hear the gears turning in his head, like a man weighing his chances. Then, with a sudden twist, Cartwright shoved Samantha forward and bolted. The force exploded into chaos. Blaze launched after him, a streak of muscle and instinct tearing through the underbrush. Rick's boots pounded the earth as he chased after them, branches snapping back into his face, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Stay with the kids," he shouted over his shoulder. But the teachers barely had time to react. Blaze was faster, so much faster. The dog moved like liquid lightning, cutting to the trees, his bark sharp and relentless, echoing through the woods like a siren. Rick pushed harder, lungs burning, sweat mixing with dirt on his forehead. He could barely keep up, but he could hear it. Blaze's bark changing pitch, turning sharper, angrier, like he was closing in. Then, all at once, the noise stopped. Rick burst into a small clearing, and there was Blaze, standing over Cartwright, teeth bared, fur bristled, his entire body a wall of fury. Cartwright was on the ground, one arm raised as if to protect himself, face pale and twisted in fear. Samantha wasn't there. Rick's stomach dropped. "Where is she?" Rick roared, grabbing Cartwright by the collar and yanking him up. Cartwright didn't speak. He just stared wide-eyed, lips trembling. Blaze's growl filled the air, vibrating like a storm barely contained. Rick shook him hard. Where did she go? And then it clicked. Rick's eyes darted around the clearing. There, half hidden by a fallen tree trunk, a flash of bright pink fabric, Samantha's jacket. Rick raced over her, heart thundering, and found her curled up, sobbing, her arms around her knees. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt and tears. And when she looked up, Rick saw a look that shattered him, a look of sheer, unfiltered terror. "It's okay," Rick said softly, dropping to his knees, his voice catching in his throat. "You're safe. You're okay." Blaze trotted over, his tail wagging low, his body relaxing just enough to let Samantha bury her face into his fur. She clung to him like a lifeline, her small hands gripping his collar, her tears soaking into the thick, warm coat. Rick's hand found Blaze's head, scratching behind his ears. The dog's body shivered slightly, like the adrenaline was still racing through him, but his eyes, those deep amber eyes, were steady, focused, and so damn sure. "Good boy," Rick whispered, a lump rising in his throat. "You did good, buddy." They called the sheriff. The sirens wailed in the distance as the woods seemed to exhale, the tension bleeding out of the trees. It wasn't long before the truth started to unravel. Cartwright wasn't just a chaperone. Not really. His file, pulled up by the sheriff's deputies, showed a different name and alias, a past conviction for child endangerment, a sealed record that should have raised red flags, but somehow slipped through cracks. Rick sat on the back of the squad car, Blaze at his feet, Samantha still clinging to the dog's side. The other students had been led back to the bus. their faces pale, their eyes wide with the realization that the man they trusted protect them had been a wolf in sheep's clothing. The sheriff's deputy shook his head, lips tight. If it wasn't for your dog, God knows what would have happened. Rick looked down at Blaze, who sat quietly, his tail thumping gently against the dirt. Blaze didn't look like a hero. He didn't wear a cape, but he didn't need one. Rick exhaled, the weight of what could have been sinking deep into his bones. He thought about the times he'd brushed off Blaze's alertness as just a dog being a dog. How easy it would have been to ignore that bark. But Blaze never barked for no reason. And today, that bark had saved a life. The air felt different now, heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to break the silence. Rick sat on the back bumper of the sheriff's SUV, the radio chatter fading into the background as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Blaze lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes stayed sharp, still watching the trees like he wasn't ready to let his guard down. Samantha sat quietly beside him, her small hands buried in Blaze's thick fur, her body pressed close, as if the warmth of the dog was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Rick looked at her, heart twisting. Samantha hadn't said a word since they pulled her from the woods. Just silent tears, her breath hitching every now and then, her eyes wide and distant. "You okay, sweetheart?" Rick asked gently, but Samantha didn't respond. She just nodded, her face hidden in Blaze's coat. Rick exchanged a glance with the sheriff, a man named Clay Thompson, broad-shouldered, mustached, and looking every bit the small-town lawman. Clay had been the one to find Cartwright's file, his jaw tightening with every line he read. "Name's not really Cartwright," Clay muttered, thumbing through the paperwork. "Real name's Richard Carlton. Did 5 years in Ohio for attempted kidnapping. Got out on a technicality. Should have been flagged before he got anywhere near a school trip." Rick ran a hand down his face, exhaustion sinking into his bones. How the hell did he slip through? Clay shook his head. "System's not perfect. You know that as well as I do. Sometimes monsters get out." He paused, looking down at Blaze. "But thank God for him." "Huh?" That dog knew. He just knew. Rick looked at Blaze. Really looked at him and felt a pang of guilt. How many times had he told Blaze to settle down, to be quiet, to stop barking at the wrong time? How many times had he ignored that instinct because it didn't fit the moment? Blaze hadn't been wrong. Not once. Rick leaned down, scratching behind Blaze's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes closing just for a second, as if the weight of the day had finally caught up to him. "Good boy," Rick whispered. The sheriff's voice cut in. "Kid says he was talking to her, trying to get her to go with him into the woods. Promise her ice cream. Said he had a dog she could pet." Clay's voice darkened. Classic bait. Rick's blood went cold. Samantha had barely spoken, but she didn't need to. The pieces were falling into place. How Cartwright had hovered around her all day. How he had smiled too much, gotten too close. How Blaze had barked like a man possessed the moment Cartwright had stepped out of line. It wasn't luck that saved Samantha. It was Blaze. Rick sat in silence for a moment, then turned to Samantha. "Can you tell me what he said?" "Honey, just a little bit. Anything you remember could help." Samantha's voice was a whisper, barely audible. He said I should come see something, a secret in the woods. He told me not to tell anyone." Rick felt his stomach knot. He nodded slowly, keeping his voice calm. "You did the right thing by staying put. You did the right thing by not going." Samantha's lower lip trembled. She reached out and touched Blaze's fur again. He stopped him. Blaze stopped him. Rick's throat tightened. Yeah, Blaze did. Just then, a teacher approached. Mrs. Peterson, the art teacher, her face pale and her voice shaking. "Rick, we just found something in Cartwright's, in Richard's car." Rick stood up, tension rising in his chest. "What is it?" She swallowed hard, glancing at Samantha before lowering her voice. "A duffel bag. It had rope, duct tape, candy bars, and a camera." Rick closed his eyes, a wave of nausea hitting him like a punch. He turned to Clay. "You getting this?" Clay was already scribbling in his notebook. "Yeah, we'll log everything. Build the case." Rick looked at Blaze. The dog's ears twitched as if he was listening, as if he knew they were talking about him. His amber eyes glowed with a quiet intensity, as if to say, I told you, I knew it was wrong. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned that soft orange pink that always seemed too pretty for a day like this, Rick sat on the grass with Samantha and Blaze. The other kids were quiet, gathered in small groups near the buses, their laughter gone, replaced by hushed whispers and nervous glances toward the woods. Samantha finally broke the silence. Will Blaze come with us on the next trip? Rick looked at her, surprised by the question. Samantha's voice was still small, but there was a spark in her eyes now, a tiny flicker of trust, of safety. I think Blaze should go everywhere, she added, her fingers still gently stroking the dog's back. Rick smiled, his throat tight. Yeah, kid, I think you're right. Blaze lifted his head, tail giving a soft thump against the ground, and Rick swore he saw something in those eyes, something more than just animal instinct. It was almost like understanding, like Blaze knew exactly what she had just said, and he agreed. Blaze hadn't just saved a life. He had changed it. As the buses finally loaded and the kids left the campsite, Rick stood by the tree lean, watching the last of the vehicles pull away. Blaze sat beside him, calm now, but his gaze still scanning the horizon. Come on, partner, Rick said, patting his side. Let's get you home. And as they walked back toward the cruiser, Blaze stayed close, his step steady, his head held high. Because some heroes don't need a badge. They just need a good nose and the courage to trust it. The Monday after the field trip felt different. The morning sun streamed to the windows of Willow Creek Elementary, casting warm beams onto the polished floors and bulletin boards filled with crayon drawings and glittery cutouts of hearts and stars. But underneath the usual buzz of kids filing into classrooms, there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something that lingered like the last note of a song you couldn't quite forget. Rick stood at the front office, sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, watching as Samantha arrived with her mom. The little girl held tightly to a stuffed animal, her backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes darting nervously around the room like a bird ready to take flight. Blaze sat beside Rick, leash loose but his body alert. His ears twitched every time the front door swung open, and his tail gave a soft thump against the floor when Samantha's gaze finally landed on him. Her lips trembled, but she took a hesitant step forward. Then another, and then she was there, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around Blaze's neck, burying her face's fur like it was the only safe place in the world. Rick's throat tightened. He exchanged a glance with Samantha's mom, who mouthed a silent, "Thank you," tears brimming in her eyes. Rick gave a small nod, but it was Blaze who had earned the gratitude. Blaze stayed perfectly still, his head slightly tilted, eyes soft, as if he understood the weight of the moment. His tail swished slowly across the floor, steady and calm, like a heartbeat. Later that morning, Principal Daniels called an assembly. The entire school gathered in the gym, kids crisscross applesauce on the floor, teachers lining the walls, and a small stage set up at the front with a microphone and a few folding chairs. Rick stood off to the side with Blaze, watching as Samantha took a seat in the front row, her fingers twisting nervously in the hem of her shirt. He could see the way the other kids glanced at her, some with wide eyes, others whispering behind their hands. But there was a new kind of energy in the room, a buzz, a story that had traveled through every hallway and classroom. How a dog had saved a little girl from a man she thought she could trust. Principal Daniels cleared his throat into the microphone. Good morning, everyone. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment to talk about what happened last week. I know many of you have questions, and it's important we talk about it together as a school family. The word family hung in the air, and Rick felt a subtle shift in the room. Heads tilted forward. Kids leaned in. Teachers rested a gentle hand on a student's shoulder. This wasn't just a school. It was a community. Daniels gestured to Blaze. As many of you know, this is Blaze, our K-9 officer. And last Friday, Blaze did something truly incredible. He helped protect one of our students, Samantha, from a very dangerous situation. There was a ripple of murmurs across the gym. Some kids gasped quietly. Others just stared at Blaze with wide eyes, like they were seeing him for the first time. Rick stepped forward, his boots echoing on the polished floor. He cleared his throat. Blaze didn't just happen to be in the right place at the right time. Blaze knew. He sensed something wasn't right. And because he trusted his instincts, and because we listened, Samantha is safe. He let the words hang there, feeling the weight of them settle over the room. I know this might be a lot to take in, Rick continued. But here's the most important thing you need to remember. If you ever feel like something is wrong, even if you can't explain why, you need to tell someone. You need to speak up because your voice matters. And sometimes the smallest voices, the quietest ones, are the ones we need to hear the most. He looked at Samantha, her small figure dwarfed by the crowd, and saw her shoulders straighten just a little. She gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. After the assembly, kids crowded around Blaze, reaching out to pet him, asking questions, wanting to know if he could smell danger from a mile away, if he had superpowers. Samantha stayed close, her hand resting gently on Blaze's back, like she didn't want to let go. Rick knelt down beside her. "You're doing really good," he said quietly, "really brave." Samantha didn't say anything, but her eyes sparkled with something that wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. That afternoon, the local news station showed up. A young reporter in a tailored blazer crouched down to Blaze's level, microphone in hand, while the camera crew filmed. "Can you tell us, Officer Morales?" she asked. "What makes Blaze so special? What makes him a hero?" Rick smiled, glancing at Blaze, who sat calmly at his side, tail wagging softly, tongue lolling out in a relaxed pant. "Well," Rick said, his voice warm and steady, "he listens. That's what makes him special. Blaze listens when others don't. And sometimes that's the difference between a close call and a tragedy." The news clip aired that evening, and by the next day, the story had spread across town. The local diner taped a photo of Blaze to their window with a sign that read, "Thank you, Blaze, our hometown hero." The hardware store put a dog bowl outside with a handwritten note for Blaze, "Drink anytime." Kids drew pictures of Blaze and hung them in the school hallway, each one more colorful than the last. And Samantha, while she started walking a little taller, she still had quiet days, moments when her eyes would darken and her hands would shake. But she was smiling more now, laughing with friends, letting herself be a kid again. Blaze became her shadow, her protector, and her friend. Every day at recess, she'd find him, whether it was to sit quietly in the sun or toss a ball across the grass. And Blaze was always there, ready, watching, waiting, because heroes don't just save lives. They stand by you long after the danger has passed. The seasons were changing in Willow Creek, but something stayed the same. The leaves turned golden and crisp, crunching under sneakers as kids raced across the playground. Halloween decorations popped up in store windows, and the air smelled like pumpkin spice and bonfires. But for Samantha, it wasn't just fall. It was after the field trip, after the day Blaze saved her, after the day her world split into before and after. The nightmares still came sometimes, dark and heavy, like a weight pressing on her chest. She'd wake up with her sheets tangled in tears on her pillow, heart racing, the sound of Blaze's bark echoing in her mind like a lifeline. But Blaze was there, always there. Rick started bringing Blaze by the school more often, not as part of an official duty, but as a friend. Samantha's mom had asked if it was okay, and Rick had said yes without hesitation. Blaze became a quiet presence in the hallways, his tail thumping against the lockers as kids reached down to pet him between classes. For Samantha, Blaze was more than a dog. He was safety, a steady heartbeat in a world that sometimes still felt too loud, too fast, too unpredictable. One afternoon during recess, Samantha sat cross-legged under the big oak tree at the edge of the playground. The leaves drifted down like golden confetti, and Blaze lay beside her, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed in the sun. A small group of kids gathered nearby, Emma, Tyler, and Jason, watching Samantha, waiting. Emma spoke first. "Is it true Blaze can tell when something's wrong?" Samantha nodded, her fingers running to the thick fur on Blaze's neck. "Like, he just knows," Jason added, his voice a little breathless, like he couldn't quite believe it. Samantha glanced at Blaze, then at her friends. "Yeah," she said softly. "He knows." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of easy quiet that only happens between kids and dogs. And then Tyler asked the question they had all been wondering. Were you scared? Samantha thought about that, about the way Cartwright's hand had gripped her wrist, about the way Blaze's bark had shattered the stillness, about the way her heart had pounded so loud she thought it might break. She looked at Blaze, at the calm in his eyes, the steady rise and fall of his breath, and something inside her steadied. Too. Yeah, she admitted. I was scared, but Blaze wasn't. And when he was there, I wasn't alone. Her friends nodded, their eyes wide, a little awed. They didn't press her for details. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Samantha's mom picked her up and pulled into the parking lot just as Rick and Blaze were getting ready to leave. Samantha hesitated for a second, then jogged over to them. "Officer Rick," she asked, her voice small but steady. Rick turned, smiling. "Hey, Samantha, what's up?" She looked at Blaze, then back at Rick. Do you think Blaze could come to my class and maybe help teach kids about how dogs can help people? About how dogs like Blaze save lives?" Rick blinked, surprised. But it was the good kind of surprise, the kind that warmed you from the inside out. "I think that's a great idea," he said, glancing down at Blaze, who wagged his tail like he'd been waiting for the invitation. So the next week, Blaze visited Samantha's class. Rick talked about K9 training, how dogs like Blaze learn to listen, to protect, to trust their instincts. He showed the kids how Blaze could sit, stay, and even find hidden objects in the classroom. But the best part was when Samantha stood up, her voice a little shaky, but her smile strong, and told her classmates the story. How Blaze had known something was wrong. How he'd barked and wouldn't stop. How that bark had saved her life. The room was silent when she finished. The kind of silence that feels big and important. Then someone started clapping. Then another. And soon the whole class was clapping, a wave of applause that made Samantha's cheeks turn pink and Blaze's tail wag, so hard it knocked over a pencil cup. Rick couldn't help but grin. As the weeks passed, Blaze became more than a school visitor. He became a symbol of bravery, of trust, of listening when something feels wrong. The local newspaper ran a story. K9 hero saves girl, inspires school to learn from four-legged friend. The mayor invited Rick and Blaze to a community event, and Samantha's story spread in the small town like a ripple in a pond. At home, Samantha's mom noticed a change, too. Samantha was sleeping better, eating better. The nightmares didn't come as often, and when they did, Samantha would curl up with a stuffed animal, a little German shepherd plush her mom had bought her, and whisper, "Blaze wouldn't let anything happen to me." And every now and then, Rick would find a crayon drawing slipped into Blaze's kennel at the station, a picture of a big, smiling dog with a little girl standing next to him, holding a leash, her hair blowing in the wind. The words in shaky handwriting said, "Thank you for saving me." Rick kept those drawings pinned up in the office. One evening, after a long shift, Rick sat in his kitchen with a cold beer in hand, Blaze stretched out at his feet. The house was quiet, the hum of the fridge filling the space. Rick looked down at Blaze, who had one ear cocked, like he was half listening even in sleep, and felt a deep, grateful ache in his chest. Not all heroes wear capes. "Huh, boy," he murmured. Blaze's tail thumped once, soft and steady. And in that moment, Rick knew, some stories don't end with a headline or a handshake. Some stories keep going, day after day, in the quiet ways we heal, the small ways we show up, and the silent strength of a dog who never stops listening. Winter crept into Willow Creek slowly. That year, the air turned crisp. The leaves fell in swirls of orange and gold, and the first frost dusted the fields like powdered sugar on a pie. But inside the small town, something had changed. Something you couldn't see but could feel. It was in the way people greeted each other, a little warmer. In the extra glance parents gave their kids when dropping them off at school. In the way Blaze's name seemed to ripple through conversations at the grocery store or the diner. Blaze wasn't just a dog anymore. He was their dog, their hero. For Samantha, the weeks turned into months, and little by little, the fear started to fade. It didn't disappear entirely. Some scars run too deep for that. But she smiled more, laughed more, She started raising her hand in class again, answering questions in a voice that no longer trembled. She walked a little taller, her steps lighter, as if the weight she'd been carrying had shifted from her shoulders onto the steady back of a loyal dog. Rick noticed it, too. One afternoon in early December, Samantha's mom invited Rick and Blaze over for dinner. A small thank you, she'd said. They ate spaghetti and garlic bread at the kitchen table while Samantha told Rick about her art project, and Blaze lounged at her feet, basking in the warmth of the home. After dinner, Samantha sat on the floor beside Blaze, her hands brushing through his fur, as if tracing the threads of a story only they knew. "Do you think Blaze remembers?" she asked quietly. Rick looked at her, then at Blaze, who gave a soft woof in response, his tail thumping lazily on the floor. "Oh, I think he remembers," Rick said with a smile. "Dogs like Blaze? They don't forget the people they protect, and they don't stop watching out for them either." Samantha nodded, her small face serious. "He's my best friend," she whispered. Rick felt a lump rise in his throat. He reached down and scratched Blaze behind the ears. And for a moment, the kitchen was quiet. Just the soft sound of Samantha's breathing, Blaze's steady heartbeat, and the hum of the fridge. As Christmas approached, the school invited Rick and Blaze back for a special assembly. The kids had been working on a surprise, a mural painted on the hallway wall near the entrance. It was a bright, colorful scene of Blaze standing tall in a field of green, surrounded by smiling kids, with big block letters that read, "Blaze, the hero, always watching, always protecting." Rick swallowed hard when he saw it, blinking back the sudden sting in his eyes. Samantha stood by his side, her hand resting gently on Blaze's back. She looked up at Rick and said, "It's true, you know. He really is always protecting us." Rick smiled and ruffled her hair. "Yeah, kiddo, he is." As the assembly wrapped up, the principal handed Rick a small plaque that read, "In honor of Blaze, for his courage, loyalty, and the lives he changed." Rick took the plaque with a quiet nod, but when he looked down at Blaze, it felt like they were sharing the moment together, like they both understood that this wasn't just about one day or one act of bravery. It was about the bond they'd built, the trust between a handler and his dog, between a girl and the animal who had saved her life. Blaze didn't need a medal or a trophy. He just needed to know he'd done his job. And he did. That night, Rick sat on his porch, the winter air cool against his skin, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Blaze lay beside him, his head resting on Rick's boot, his eyes half closed in that peaceful, watchful way dogs have when they know they're safe, but still on duty. Rick looked out at the quiet street, the twinkle of Christmas lights in the distance, and felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Blaze, but for the community that had rallied around them, for the chance to make a difference, for the reminder that sometimes it's the small acts of courage that ripple out the furthest. He leaned down, scratching Blaze's ears. "You're a good boy, you know that?" Blaze's tail wagged gently, a slow, steady beat in the cold night air. And as the stars blinked overhead, Rick thought about the question Samantha had asked, about memories, about bravery, about what it means to be safe. He thought about how a dog's bark had cut through the noise of an ordinary day and saved a life. And he knew, without a doubt, that some heroes don't wear uniforms or badges or capes. Some heroes have 4 legs, a keen nose, and a heart that never stops listening. Thank you for following the story of Blaze, the hero, and for being part of our journey. Have you ever had a moment when you just knew something wasn't right? Even if you couldn't explain it, what did you do about it? Let's keep the conversation going, because sometimes trusting our instincts can make all the difference.